Hi everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video, we're going to be talking all about New Jerusalem, meaning Independence, Jackson County, Missouri, and the future center place of New Jerusalem, the actual city. Not North and South America, not the entirety of the church, because those are other definitions for New Jerusalem that we've looked up, but we're talking about the actual center place. And the main thing that we're going to be focusing on, well, at least that's going to start this video, is a new video put out by the church. This is put out by Church News 1 day ago. Interestingly, 17,000 views as of right now, is at the time that I'm making this video. And this is essentially an interview with Elder Bednar. And he talks about Zion and about the gathering. And he clarifies what I believe is a misconception that others entertain in their theories about New Jerusalem. But we'll get into that in just a minute. Really quick, here's the update on the Book of Mormon Sharing Challenge, or the Flood the Earth campaign. I don't have it updated today, but here's the most recent update, or most recent numbers since yesterday, which I haven't shown you yet. So currently there have been 5,187 copies of the Book of Mormon that have been sent out and shared with your friends and family. 487 people that have joined the challenge. And we have a new report of someone that's meeting with the missionaries and actually has a baptism date set. So I told that person, let me know once the person gets baptized, if they end up getting a photo, and if it's okay with that person, send it to me. I'll show it to you guys, just like I did with Grace's 2 co-workers that got baptized. So great job, everybody. Keep it going. You know, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. This challenge is meant to help encourage you and others to share copies of the Book of Mormon that you otherwise may not have shared. It's kind of like an incentive to do that. So whenever you share one, just put it in the comments of any video or send me an email and put #flood so I can easily find it. And please keep your message very short. Thank you. Okay, so back to this, New Jerusalem. Okay, so what did Elder Bednar just say in regards to this? So I'll put the link for this in the description below, but I'm just going to read the transcript. It's pretty short. This is Elder Bednar talking the whole time. He says, if you take a look at the construction of temples, you begin to see in the 1970s increased construction of temples all around the world. What we're seeing now is an acceleration of what began in the 1970s in bringing the temples closer to the people. That is a magnificent thing to behold in this remarkable season of the history of the church. Now, one thing that you may not know, and I learned this from Elder Bednar in a different address that he was giving to some CES personnel. It was actually Spencer W. Kimball. He was the first one to come up with the idea of having smaller temples. And then it was President Hinckley that announced a very large number of even smaller temples. But the first smaller size temples, that was initiated by President Spencer W. Kimball. All right, continuing on. He says, I think this is one of the great indications that the restoration is ongoing in the early history of the church. The call to the Latter-day Saints all over the world was to come to Zion, come to Kirtland, come to Nauvoo, come to Salt Lake. And Joseph taught that the purpose of the gathering was so that saints would be in a position, in a place where temples could be built. They needed the people, they needed the resources, they needed the skills to be able to do that. So that was the purpose of the entire church gathering. It has to do with temples and being able to build temples, being able to have people receive the blessings and the covenants of the temple. All right, but continuing on, he says, but that began to change in the administration of President Kimball when he and other church leaders said, no, stay where you are. Don't come to Salt Lake. This is not the only place where you find Zion. Okay, now why am I bringing this up? Because there's this really big misconception. Well, I don't know how big it is really, but there's a certain faction of people that the way that they foresee the second coming in the millennium is that the entire church, all that are righteous, the entire church is going to be living in Missouri, in the Jackson County area, in New Jerusalem. And uh, from what I've gathered, it's based on their understanding when they read Doctrine and Covenants. They see it as like a frozen in time type of thing, that no, that is set in stone. The entire church is supposed to be in Jackson County, Missouri, and that's how things are going to be in the last days. Okay. Whereas what Elder Bednar and others have said is that in the beginning, at the time when the Doctrine and Covenants were written, that was the directive for that time. Okay. In the future was uncertain. They were just going with what the Lord was saying. Okay, now's the time for everyone to gather to New Jerusalem. We're going to build New Jerusalem. But guess what? That didn't happen. The saints weren't ready. And so they moved on. They moved on to Nauvoo. They moved on to Salt Lake. And we're waiting to build it again. That is still in the plans. And I can say that based on what church leaders have said. But what I cannot say is that the entire church is supposed to be in Jackson County, Missouri in the future. And I have lots of quotes about that. This is just the most recent one from David A. Bednar. And he says that it primarily changed with Spencer W. Kimball, which is interesting because I never really thought that all the way up until the 70s, the church encouraged you to um, move to church headquarters. But this is just what he's saying. And they probably weren't really pushing for people necessarily to move to Salt Lake City, but it's kind of like that idea hadn't really been cut off yet. The church, even in 1970, or in the 1970s, was still relatively young, or at least like when you think about temples and the number of temples around the world, there were very few. In fact, let's take a look at that really quick. LDS temple chronology. Let's just go here. So, I already went too far. I scrolled just like 2 times with the mouse wheel, and that was already too far. So let's see, Spencer W. Kimball. Okay, so during his time, we had these temples. So, yeah. So at the beginning of his presidency, okay, there would have been 15 temples. And then the first temple that got dedicated under his presidency was the Washington, D.C. temple. So what that meant for everybody all around the world is, okay, you can live there, but you need to get your, receive your endowments, have your initiatories, receive your endowments. If you're going to get sealed as a family, you need to come to the temple to do that. And look at all the options that you had back in the 70s. You could go to Salt Lake, Hawaii, Alberta, Canada, Arizona, Idaho, Switzerland, Los Angeles, New Zealand, London, or the London, England temple. Then the San Francisco area with the Oakland temple, or these other 2 in Utah. So that's kind of a problem if you're pretty much anywhere back east in the United States, or virtually all of Europe. I mean, depending on how close you are to the Switzerland temple. So anyway, but let's get back. Let me just read exactly what he said. So again, he said, okay, in the early history of the church, the call to the Latter-day Saints all over the world was to, this is not, the transcription is not right here. The call to the Latter-day Saints all over the world was to come to Zion, come to Kirtland, come to Nauvoo, come to Salt Lake, and Joseph taught that the purpose of the gathering was so that the saints would be in a position, in a place where temples could be built. They needed the people, they needed the resources, they needed the skills to be able to do that. But that began to change in the administration of President Kimball, when he and other church leaders said, no, stay where you are and don't come to Salt Lake City. This is not the only place where you find Zion. For the saints in Argentina, Zion is Argentina. The great blessing is that a world that grows increasingly dark and increasingly wicked increasingly wicked, access to the power of godliness through the covenants and ordinances of the gospel of Jesus Christ is one of the greatest spiritual resources and blessings the members have. I think of a few invitations President Nelson has offered more frequently. Okay, I can't think. Well, I can think of a few invitations President Nelson has offered more frequently than be in the temples as often as your circumstances will allow. We often just take these things for granted. We live in a very hectic, busy life, and so it's easy to get caught up in the business. Uh, that whatever that we miss the mark in focusing on the things that matter the very most. So this is another confirmation that there's not a directive to go to. That was a thing of the early church. It's not a thing now. It's not a thing going forward. Now, here's a couple of other things. So this statement from Elder Bednar, this is just the most recent. But the next most recent came in April 2020 by President Nelson himself. Okay, this was in the Ensign in an article called "The Future of the Church." Okay, what's in the future of the church? The millennium, preparing the world for the Savior's second coming. Okay, so what does he say about that? He says, the choice to come unto Christ is not a matter of physical location. It is a matter of individual commitment. All members of the church have access to the doctrine, ordinances, priesthood keys, and blessings of the gospel, regardless of their location. People can be brought to the knowledge of the Lord without leaving their homelands. True, in the early days of the church, conversion often meant immigration as well. But now, the gathering takes place in each nation. The Lord has decreed the establishment of Zion in each realm where he has given his saints their birth and nationality. The place of gathering for Brazilian saints is in Brazil. The place of gathering for Nigerian saints is in Nigeria. The place of gathering for Korean saints is in Korea. Zion is, quote unquote, the pure in heart. It is wherever righteous saints are. Spiritual security will always depend upon how one lives, not where one lives. It must be like, I don't know. It's like, I'm not trying to like start in contention, but when it's so clear coming from President Nelson himself, coming from Elder Bednar, an apostle of the Lord. Okay, and then there's these other two, Bruce R. McConkie, and then you have this article by Graham Doxey that was in the April 1979 Ensign addressing this issue, and yet there's people that still perpetuate this idea. Like it's like a romanticized version of how they interpret the Doctrine and Covenants and the Journal of Discourses. Because what I've noticed is that the people that usually entertain those kind of ideas, like that everybody's going to walk or drive or whatever, everyone's going to make their way by whatever means to Missouri. Okay. And then it's going to be a fortress city where the rest of the world is going to be at world war, civil war, stuff like that. But they're not going to be able to penetrate the defenses of New Jerusalem. It's a very like romanticized, I don't know, thing that they put together based on their selected citations from Doctrine and Covenants and what's it called? The Journal of Discourses. Okay. You have to take everything into account. You have to take all the scriptures into account. You have to take what our current living prophets and apostles say. It all works together. It's not divided. It's not one against the other. In the early days of the church, not everything was revealed. And the current directive was, okay, everybody gather. And if everything goes right, we are going to be here in Jackson County, Missouri. And this is going to become the New Jerusalem. And then we're going to receive Christ. But there was a hiccup along the way where the saints weren't ready because of contention. And so now, well, even then, oh gosh, I wish I had the other. There's something that's from the Journal of Discourses where there was I think it was a 70 talking about the fact that in the early days they thought in very small terms. But then they realized that Zion is going to cover the entire world. It's not just going to be Jackson County, Missouri. Dang, I wish I had that pulled up. Hold on. Okay, here it is. I found it. This is one I definitely need to put on my spreadsheets. Okay, so this is a discourse by Elder Erastus Snow. He was an apostle. This is February 2nd, 1884. Okay, so this is the early days of the church. By this point, the church headquarters is now in Salt Lake. Utah is not yet a state, but it will be soon in 1896. Okay, so he says, the time was in the infancy of this church when our minds were so narrow compared to what they are now, that we looked for the speedy coming of our Lord in the accomplishment of his great work before this time. But as our minds grew and our ideas enlarged, we began to perceive that we were only children in our views and feelings, our ideas and expectations. And I'm not meaning for this to be disrespectful, okay? But I feel like there's certain theories out there, different groups with their ideas about New Jerusalem, everyone being gathered to New Jerusalem and things like that, where they're still stuck back before 1886. Because here you have Erastus Snow talking about they realized that that wasn't entirely correct as far as like the entire church. Just let's continue. We had the views, ideas, and expectations of children. And we see how the Lord has enlarged Israel and expanded his work, and now we behold so much more to accomplish than what has been accomplished, that we are apt in our minds to put off the day of the Lord a great way. The time was that we looked for one temple. The early revelations given to the Latter-day Saints predicted a temple in Zion, and Zion in our minds. Now listen to this. In Zion in our minds at that time was a little place on the Missouri River in Jackson County, western Missouri. A town and a few surrounding villages, or a country pre-adventure, it may be as large as a county. When we first heard the fullness of the gospel preached by the first elders and read the revelations given through the prophet Joseph Smith, our ideas of Zion were very limited. But as our minds began to grow and expand, why we began to look upon Zion as a great people, and that the stakes of Zion as numerous, and the area of the country to be inhabited by the people of Zion as this great American continent, or at least such portions of it as the Lord should consecrate for the gathering of his people. We ceased to set bounds to Zion and her stakes. We began also to cease to think about a single temple in one certain place. Seeing the different stakes of Zion that were being organized, we perceived the idea possibly of as many temples. Having had one spot pointed out in the revelations for the temple in Jackson County, our minds expanded so that in a short time we were building another temple in a stake of Zion in Kirtland, Ohio. A little while afterwards, we were laying the foundation of a temple in far west Missouri, and driven before our enemies from that place, we next laid the foundation and built up a temple unto the Lord in Nauvoo. When we located in the mountains and laid the foundation of a temple in Salt Lake City, who of us had an idea that before it should be completed, we would be administering in a temple in St. George, and another in Logan, and another in Manti? And who conceives the idea today that by the time these are completed and the saints have officiated in them, we will be scattered over the American continent, building temples in 100 other places? Whoa. Okay. All this comes within the range of possibility, nay, probability, almost amounting to certainty. One of my brethren behind me here, who understands these things and who can speak knowingly in regard to them, says that um, we may put it down as a certainty that by and by there will be hundreds of these temples throughout the land. Our minds are beginning to comprehend the object and purpose of the temples of our God. We realize that they are places where the Lord bestows the keys of life and salvation pertaining to the everlasting priesthood and opens the door of redemption and salvation unto our dead. Okay. And of course, look at this list right here. You know, right now, at the time I'm recording this, there is 176 temples in operation, and we have a few more that are slated to be dedicated this year. It's been a while since I've updated my Second Coming timeline, but let me hop over there really quick. So we got the Richmond, Virginia temple coming up in May, and then Helena, Montana in June, Saratoga Springs in August, and then two on the same day on September 17th, one in Brasilia, Brazil, and one in Bentonville, Arkansas. Those are the ones that have dedication dates. Although that there may be more since I last updated this, I'll have to check. But you can see that even by the time even at this early stage here, 1884, they realized that it's not about the saints all gathering to just one location, to Jackson County, Missouri. Because I've heard the arguments like, well, yeah, it's not going to be the entire church, it's just going to be the righteous. No, no one says that. That's not anywhere. Um, so you have this, okay? You have what David A. Bednar just said yesterday. You have what President Nelson said in 2020. You have what Bruce R. McConkie said, and you have what was published in the Ensign, April 1979. This is an article called Missouri Myths. I've seen people argue against this for some reason, as though the church just lets anything get into the Ensign, like anybody's random ideas. This is something that went through the correlation process. The correlation process is that if anything gets published by the church, like the Ensign, the Leahona, church manuals, whatever, it goes through a process where they make sure everything's doctrinally correct. You can be assured that what's in the Ensign is correct. The prophet's not just like sitting there with his arms folded, like, well, Graham W. Doxey, I don't know. That I wouldn't say that. I mean, I'm the prophet, I know, but go ahead, write that if you want. No. You think that the prophet didn't read this, or the apostles, or the general authorities? So the first myth is that we're going to walk. It doesn't matter if you say walk or whatever. We're going to go to Missouri to prepare for the second coming. Myth number two, the entire church will be gathered to Missouri. And then number three, won't there be immense destructions in Missouri preceding the second coming, so extensive that not a yellow dog will be left to wag his tail? I've already done multiple videos just on this article by itself, so I'm not going to read through all that. Okay. But as far as the church is concerned, those things are not correct. We're not going to be going to Missouri to prepare for the second coming, like in mass. The entire church is not going to be gathered there, and there's not going to be immense destructions in Missouri preceding the second coming. Because the idea with that is that, oh, these other churches, the one owns the temple lot. Community of Christ owns space where the 24 temple complex would be built. So what has to happen is that the entire area has to be wiped clean so that we can build New Jerusalem. And that's not a view that's held in the church. We don't know what the Lord's going to do, but people teach it as though that's the case, and that's not an official view of the church. It's not. And by the way, here's the actual. I guess on BYU they have like the scanned version of this of this article, Missouri Myths. So it's kind of interesting. I just came across this as I was looking up the other thing. Anyway, but this is on the church website. Here's on the BYU, and it's the scanned version. Um, and just by using just basic reasoning, okay, this is on the church website. This is under history.churchofjesuschrist.org, okay, and you have this bird eye view of where the 24 temple complex would have been had it been constructed and will be in the future. And again, this building right here is our visitor center. It's the LDS Visitor Center built to the specifications that you can find in the Joseph Smith papers. I've already done a video about that. By the way, all these videos I'm referring to, I have a playlist. I'll here pull it up. I'll put this in the description below. And sorry, I know that for some of you this is all repetition, but there's always new people that are always not familiar with this because you have some of these other things being perpetuated and taught in books and on YouTube and other places. So I have to keep bringing it up. You know, people will be like, "Hey, have you heard of so and so? Have you watched so and so? Have you read this book? Have you da 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 da?" And the answer is yes. I've seen all those things. I know about them. I know what they're about. Okay, and that's not to say that they're all completely wrong, but there's certain things that are definitely wrong. And I'm not trying to put anybody down, but that's why you have to do this big study, and you have to collect what's actually said by prophets and apostles, rather than just read the Doctrine and Covenants by yourself, read the Journal of Discourses by yourself, and then try and piece it together in your mind, and map it out on a piece of paper. You have to take everything that's been going on since that time. And it's really valuable to listen to modern day prophets and apostles because the Lord is working through them. If anybody knows what the plan is, it's the current prophet. But we're going to get to that in just a little bit. So here's the playlist. I've done 58 videos so far. This will be the 59th, the one that I'm doing right now. Okay, so this is the area of the 24 temple complex, okay? So you can see that there's some obstacles standing in the way of that happening. And the Lord will take care of that however he does. And I don't think it's going to be in a brutal way. I think it's going to happen naturally. Like I said, the community of Christ, they're not very big. They never have been. And it seems like they're kind of going the way of many other churches. A lot of people are going the way of non-denominational, or just like being your own personal church. Like you and other Christians, like you're considered the church in their view, but you don't go to an actual building. And they're having some financial issues. I've done videos about that, so I wouldn't be surprised if over time they're not able to maintain this and they sell this off. I don't know. The Church of Christ Temple lot right here, this tiny little building, they only have about 1,700 members last I checked. They're even smaller than the Community of Christ. And so anyway, that's kind of beside the point. So remember, at the time that Joseph Smith was planning um, New Jerusalem, the center place, this was going to be New Jerusalem right here. Okay, you have all these like different little lots right here for your house, and then you'd have however many acres. Okay, so you could have a garden and stuff like that. Here's the 24 temples in the center, and they all have names and purposes. I've already done a video about that, going over the names. We've looked at the Joseph Smith papers. Okay, and then Joseph Smith revised it, and it became bigger. But this was the final version of what New Jerusalem was going to look like. Okay, so the entire church, whenever this is built, because as far as I can tell, this would still be the plans. I don't know about the city itself. I don't know, but the temples, yes, it seems like that's still the plan. Because why? It's because I'll keep pulling it up again and again and again. Interpreter, foundation, temple, lot. I'm so thankful for this article put out by the Interpreter Foundation. No, it's not that one. This one? No. This one? Ah, yes, here we go. By the way, this is what the temples are supposed to look like. This was revealed to Joseph Smith. Okay. They resemble roughly the Kirtland Temple. Here's, the plat. Okay, you go down here. Sorry for everybody that has heard this a million times, but this is going to be new for somebody. Okay, they were worried about eminent domain, about the City of Independence taking this land that was undeveloped. Okay, so the church made an announcement in December 1967 for the present Visitors Center. Okay, right here. Plans were quickly developed and formally approved in April 1968. A groundbreaking ceremony was held the following August. Interestingly, in the development of those plans in early 1967 by church architect Emil Fetzer, and with input directly from Alvin R. Dyer, which he was in the first presidency, and approval by President David O. McKay, the awareness of the Joseph Smith-inspired, expanded 24-temple complex prepared in early 1833 was definitely taken into consideration. So what are they talking about? They're talking about this plan right here. Not the first one. Okay? Not the first one. The second one. So this seems to substantiate the idea that this is still the plan. If you listen to Hiram Andrus, he's a LDS scholar. He talked about the fact that the way that cities were going to be, if the saints had established Zion like this, that additional cities would have been after the same pattern. I don't think 24 temples, but essentially what you would have is a city of, what did he say? I think it was like 15,000 to 20,000 people. That would be a city. Okay, so not the 17 million of us that are currently in the church. Well, let's say that half do not make it into the millennium because, the wheat and the tares and whatever. So let's say uh, 16 or sorry, 8.5 million people are not going to fit here. And this is not the plan, because all these like I said, these lots, this is for like a family. Okay, and the entire area is designed to accommodate 15,000 to 20,000 people. It was never the intention for this to house the entire church. And don't worry, I'm getting to this in just a minute. The cube, New Jerusalem, because that's another one of the things that people have wrong. And I'll show you in just a minute. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm not. Whenever you present opposing information to somebody's worldview, it's always going to upset somebody, understandably so. Please do not take this as me trying to be mean to you. It's something that, over the course of my YouTube channel, I've collected all this stuff together, just this comprehensive collection of quotes and information that has led me to this conclusion, and it's substantial. It's not just like little obscure quotes from the Journal of Discourses or my own interpretation of what I think the Doctrine and Covenants is saying. I'm relying on what's actually put out by the church. The church knows what the church is going to do. Okay, so let's continue on. So on March 10th, 1967, a meeting of Dyer in the first presidency and Fetzer, the architect, was held with McKay, the prophet, in his Hotel Utah apartment office. Dyer recorded the highlights of this session in his diary. Quote, We reported to the president that our study in this direction we reported to the president that our study in this direction was to undertake, if we could, to ascertain which of the temple buildings designated would presumably be located on that part of the temple land that the church owned. This we had arrived at and would be concentrated upon for the erection of a building for the purpose intended, the basic structure of which would be used at a future date as part of the temple complex. Dyer continued. The proposed structure would be 2 stories high with a floor dimension of 61. Okay, I was way off when I was talking about this earlier today. Wait, was I off? Okay, dimension of 61 feet by 87 feet, which dimension is the same as revealed to the prophet Joseph Smith as the approximate size of the complex buildings. This you can look up in the Joseph Smith papers. In fact, I'm going to do it right now. Okay, once again, I had to take a minute to find it. Okay, so the proposed structure would be 2 stories high with a floor dimension of 61 feet by 87 feet. And look at this. Right here, Joseph Smith papers. This house of the Lord for the presidency is 87 feet long and 61 feet wide, and 10 feet taken off on the E. Okay, just whatever. So here it is. This is what I'm showing you. Okay, up here, plan of the house of the Lord between 1 and 25 June 1833. So this is using the 1833 plat plan for the city, talking specifically about the temples. And the temples are supposed to be 87 feet long and 61 feet wide. And here you have President Dyer in making this building, which is currently used as a visitor center, making it the same dimensions as the temple. This is a temple. Okay? And this is the plan. Oh, and by the way, there was one other thing I wanted to show you. On this part of the Joseph Smith papers, it's talking about this. Actually, I wonder if that got changed with the expanded thing. Well, in the earlier version anyway, this is where I think Hiram Andrews got that number of 15 to 20,000 people. It says right here, temples for lesser contain 12 temples for the whole. The plot is supposed to contain from 15 to 20,000 people. So the expanded plot or plat or whatever must contain more. I don't know if it says it down here somewhere. I don't think so. But there's that. And then look at this. No one lot in this city, so talking about these lots for residences, no one lot in this city is to contain more than one house, and that to be built 25 feet back from the street. So there's limited space. Okay. I don't know how things will look in the future, but it seems to me like this is still the plan. That, again, a stake of Zion, the way that we know it now, is a city, and a city is a stake. 15,000 to 20,000 people, or somewhere there roundabouts. Okay? So, for the entire church to come here, it would not work. And maybe you might be saying, well, you would just build more cities like this around that area. But I would have to refer you to Elder Bednar, President Nelson, Bruce R. McConkie, and the Leahona, as well as Elder Erastus Snow. Okay. Now, look, I understand that it's hard to scour just like all these different talks, or at least it has been up until now. Before the internet, that would have been really hard to do. That would have taken a lot of time. You would have to have physical copies of all these different things. Okay. But then we got the internet, which made things easier as more things got put on the internet, got digitized. But I think a really big step for me anyway is this particular website that we're looking at right here, the BYU Scripture Citation Index, because this lets you easily search General Conference talks, the Journal of Discourses, and the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith. And you can look things up a number of different ways. You can look it up by Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 7. Who has used that in their talk? Oh, Brad Wilcox in October 2021. He used that. What was he talking about? Well, he was talking about this. Da 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 da. Right? So that's one thing you can do. You can also just like read it for yourself, just like front to back, just the classic way. You can search by speaker to see what one particular speaker, what they've talked about, or you can search. You can search both talks and the scriptures. You can search General Conference, Journal of Discourses, Scriptural Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith. Search for whatever you want. So now, using this site, it's easier to collect all the information and not just hone down to just specific things that paint a particular picture of the future. You have to take all of it together. Okay, and that kind of leads me to one of my next points here. There's this issue. Let's see. There's this issue of the further back in time you go in the church, the better the information was, the better the revelation was. And that is not true at all. There was a recent person that said something that no one trumps what Joseph Smith said, and I would generally agree. Now, one thing, just a quick thing. This is my timeline of all the quotes I've found about the 10 lost tribes, because I've been wanting to get down to the root of this issue, because if we have to wait for the 10 lost tribes to come, and then they have to like come and build up Zion, build a super city and stuff, that's definitely going to take some time. And that could also give you false expectations. You see all these things going on, all these other signs, but you're like, no, we're not even close because the 10 lost tribes are not here yet. And so we're still decades away, or whatever the case may be, whatever your theory is. So you can see how that's something that you want to maybe sort out in your mind. Well, thankfully, it's not something that you have to think about or figure out. We have leaders in the church that already know what the plan is, that receive revelation for the church, because you don't do that and I don't do that. The prophet does. Okay? So I put together this timeline of all these quotes. Okay? Red is against the idea that there's a main group of the 10 lost tribes that are hidden somewhere from the rest of the earth. Okay? Red means against. And going down, we're going back in time. So we have Brad Wilcox, Ruben V. Aliad, D. Todd Christofferson, Dallin H. Oaks. We have Joseph F. McConkie. I just put what he said there, but he's a scholar, so I just thought what he said was interesting. President Nelson right here, and then you have some more scholars and what they said. Bruce R. McConkie, LeGrand Richards. Say that 10 times fast. Then, when you get back to 1952, now there have been a couple other quotes. If you're listening and you sent me one of those other quotes, I just haven't gotten to that yet. I'm going to put it on here, but there aren't any quotes that are recent. The most recent one, I think someone sent me one that was like maybe later in the 50s, maybe in the early 60s, I'm not sure. But as you go back in time, you have, there is, you have Joseph Fielding Smith, who says it in not an authoritative way, but he says it like, well, I think that there is. He says, whether these tribes are in the north or not, I am not prepared to say. As I've said before, they are lost until the Lord wishes it. So it's like an ambiguous statement. Joseph Fielding Smith, Orson F. Whitney, James E. Talmage, possibly Wilford Woodruff. Oh, no, this is Wilford Woodruff. Sorry. And and then Orson Pratt, and then supposedly Joseph Smith. Now, I didn't put this down as Joseph Smith because this comes from an early church member, Benjamin F. Johnson, who says that this is what Joseph Smith said. This is from his journal or his diary. There's people that say with Joseph Smith that, oh, Joseph Smith taught the 10 lost tribes were a group hidden somewhere. Show me where. Show me where that is. Because I haven't, all I ever come across, well, I haven't come across anything except for this. There's this, and then there's that hymn written by, was it Eliza R. Snow, where in the hymn she talks about the 10 lost tribes being on a distant star, which I wouldn't, I wouldn't say that that's authoritative. It's based on secondhand, accounts of what Joseph Smith said. It's not completely discounting it, but could it be that even Joseph Smith himself didn't know everything that was to transpire or how everything absolutely works? We're still receiving more revelation now. The restoration is ongoing. He didn't restore everything. He restored what was necessary to get this work going, right? But okay, so let's look at what now this is this last general conference, April 2023. This is Elder Alan D. Haynie of the 70. And this was an amazing talk. It's a great talk. A living prophet for the latter days. And this is what he said. And this is something that is desperately needed right now by a lot of people in this community. President Russell M. Nelson has testified that, quote, God's long-established pattern of teaching his children through prophets assures us that he will bless each prophet and that he will bless those who heed prophetic counsel, end quote. So the key is to follow the prophet. Brothers and sisters, unlike vintage comic books and classic cars, prophetic teachings do not become more valuable with age. Okay, prophetic teachings do not become more valuable with age. That is why we should not seek to use the words of past prophets to dismiss the teachings of living prophets. And there are people that are doing that. There are people that are doing that. Okay, if you have adopted this point of view, put it to the side. Now, he, for his footnotes for those statements, he comes over here. Okay, footnote 16. This is from The Teachings of Harold B. Lee, 1996, page 525. Quote, keep your eye upon those who preside in the church today or tomorrow, and pattern your life after them rather than to dwell upon how ancient prophets may have looked or thought or spoken. Then 17. President Spencer W. Kimball once observed that, quote, they who garnish the sepulchres of the dead prophets begin now by stoning the living ones. And then another quote from, this is from Ronald A. Rasband. The most important words we can hear, ponder, and follow are those revealed through our living prophet. So that is an incorrect way of thinking. It's an incorrect doctrine that the further back you go, the more correct it is, or the more valuable, or the more authentic it is. And that can easily lead to apostasy because then you start looking at President Nelson or whoever the current prophet is at the time, and you start to think, well, he's started to go astray. He's starting to go the way of the world. He's starting to, water things down or whatever, because through your hard research, okay, you've put together this idea, this model in your mind of what's supposed to happen at the second coming, how things are supposed to go. And it's really exciting. It's really exciting. But then when revelation comes through a more modern prophet that, well, no, it's not quite like this. This is what this means. That's what this means. then it goes again. It like rains on your parade. You know, if you're selling books that are completely based on this, then it hurts your profitability, right? And hopefully you would just make the change and be like, okay, you know what, I'm actually wrong about this, but this is how I think things are now, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, there's people that sell books. You go to Deseret Book, there's lots of books there. You know, and hopefully you would just have that integrity and be like, okay, I messed up. You know, I have better information now, and just do a new book. You know, with the updated, better information, and include that information, right? And continue to study. You know, I'm not going to leave the 10 Lost Tribe things alone. I'm not going to leave New Jerusalem. I'm going to keep gathering information forever until my knowledge is perfect. And if I have to make adjustments to how I thought before, then I will make those adjustments. That's how you should do your life. You have to accept reality. You have to go to authoritative sources. And it's not saying that past prophets were not authoritative, but they received revelation for their time. And we are living in our time. And as things progress, more revelation is given because everything is line upon line, precept upon precept. And as we get closer and closer to the future, things become clearer and clearer, right? Um, let's see, Missouri Miss. Here's like a thing that has a bunch of different sources about Independence, Missouri, and stuff like that. So I'm gonna leave that with you. Now, okay, the other thing, the other misconception about New Jerusalem is that it's going to be a gigantic moon-sized cube that attaches itself to the earth in this fashion. Okay, where does that come from? Well, it comes from chapter 21 of the book of Revelation. Now, when we start reading this as Latter-day Saints, okay, from the standard works, and we read the chapter heading, it says, "Those who overcome will be sons of God. The earth attains its celestial glory." So this is talking about after the millennium. "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband." Do not confuse, you guys, the two different Jerusalems that come out of heaven. The first one is Enoch in his city. And when we're talking about Enoch in his city, Bruce R. McConkie said we're not talking about buildings. We're not talking about like a big chunk of land like on Avengers. Let's see. Avengers, Age of Ultron. What was that place called? Vakovia or something like that? City floating. I think a lot of people picture this. They picture a city with land, you know, with rocks and stuff falling down and dirt and structures on top, beautiful structures like a main temple probably coming down and, you know, landing somewhere. Well, Bruce R. McConkie, I'm not sure that anybody else has said this, but Bruce R. McConkie said we're not talking about land and buildings. We're talking about the people of the city of Enoch. And what we learned recently about them is that they were resurrected. They're not in a translated state anymore. This was in a recent video. They're resurrected. Okay. So they're going to come down as part of the second coming. And then at the end of the millennium, there's going to be yet another group that comes down. Now, one of my very, very early videos that I did, this idea was given to me by Christian Zybarth, where basically what you have right now is a place where people that have been translated. They go to that's too complex. I'm not going to go into all that. It's not really necessarily relevant. Okay, so but there's gonna be a second Jerusalem that comes down at the end of the millennium. So we just read from this. Okay, you go down later in the chapter, and you're given the measurements. Okay, and he talked with me, had a golden reed to measure the city, and the gates thereof, and the wall thereof. And the city lieth foursquare, and the length is as large as the breadth. So it's a cube, right? Well, it's a square. And then he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. The length and the breadth and the height are equal. So okay, so there's the cube. And he measured the wall thereof in 140 in 4 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of the angel. There's that symbolic number of 144 again. When we go to the Institute manual for this, and we're talking about the holy city, New Jerusalem, okay, has that picture right there. That's what we started this off with. John saw in vision, quote, the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down, end quote, to earth, symbolizing. Now look at all the places that I've highlighted right here. Symbolizing, representative, the symbolic, symbolizing, represent, symbols. Okay. John saw in vision the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down to earth, symbolizing God's presence among his people. The city was depicted as an enormous cube, which recalls the Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple. You remember that? Let's look at Solomon's temple. Solomon's temple layout. Images. It'd be nice if there was one from our church here that we could use. Let's just go to the Wikipedia. Okay, right here. So here's the Holy of Holies. Its shape, the dimensions of it, is a cube. And we know that the Holy of Holies, that is the celestial room. Now that Christ has come, the veil has been torn. It's now possible for us to go through the veil and be in the presence of God. So a cube, okay, to a Jewish reader of the book of Revelation and those that are familiar with the temples, they'd be like, ah, yes, entering the presence of God. Because the earth, after the millennium, is going to be going into its celestial phase. So the presence of God is now here on earth. Okay. So let's continue. Okay, so the city was depicted as an enormous cube, which recalls the Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple, also representative of God's dwelling place. The symbolic elements John saw that compose the city, clear glass, precious stones, pearls, and gold, share the traits of reflecting light, resisting decay or tarnishing, and symbolizing purity, beauty, and refinement. The walls of the city were made with all manner of precious stones. Precious stones often represent the Lord's followers who have been refined and made holy. The gates of the city were made of pearls, and the streets of gold. Both pearls and gold can be seen as symbols of refinement. Okay, so I'm not going to read this whole thing because we're eventually going to be covering this whole chapter as part of the series that I'm doing, going through the book of Revelation. It's symbolic. It's symbolic. There's not going to be a Borg cube. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. There's not going to be a moon-sized cube that's going to land on North America. Okay, that's not going to happen according to this, and I've never seen it taught. And we've already read through the book of Revelation. There's so much that's symbolic in it, especially when it comes to measurement, whether it's time or whether it's length, width, height, stuff like that. When it comes to numbers, the book of Revelation uses a lot of symbolism. I have a playlist called Symbolism. You should check it out. But this is another one of those things. And you have that hint when you have the measurements that are 144, thousand furlongs or whatever it was. So is it more reasonable to see this happening, doing the original city plat, okay, having the 24 temples, or having this land on North America and basically crush and destroy all the temples that are in that area? It you have to not everything is literal. Some things are. Yeah, there are literal things in the scriptures. Again, the four beasts and the 24 elders that John saw, they were literal. They were four beasts from some other world, according to Joseph Smith. And then the 24 elders were they were essentially they were righteous men from the original church of Christ that had passed away, and they were in the spirit world. Okay, and I guess they would have been high priests too. So that was literal, but not everything in the book of Revelation is literal. You can tell that just by reading it. He uses a lot of symbolic language. Fire coming out of mouths, swords coming out of mouths, and scorpions and stuff, and da 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 da. All right. Um, Even having said all this and having provided authoritative sources from the church itself, I know that there's going to be people that don't accept this, that it's more reasonable in your way of thinking that this is what the earth is going to look like. Um, well, from what I can tell, those that have this idea, they think that this is what's going to happen at the second coming, where our scriptures say that this event takes place when the earth becomes celestial. Okay. And I don't know. That's fine. We may just have to agree to disagree. Um, Remember this right here, though. Okay, this is from Neil L. Andersen. Okay, from October 2012. This is something to keep in mind when you're putting together the model in your head of how you think things are going to happen. Remember what he says. A few question their faith when they find a statement made by a church leader decades ago that seems incongruent with our doctrine. So this could be something like a question of faith, or it could be, you think that President Nelson in the current apostles, like they're going astray from the original teachings of Joseph Smith, or the way that they view the second coming and the events of the second coming. There's an important principle that governs the doctrine of the church. The doctrine is taught by all 15 members of the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12. It is not hidden in an obscure paragraph of one talk. And that's where a lot of like this kind of stuff comes from. Okay, ideas like this, the 10 lost tribes. It's been said by a few, okay, and it's been in the past, but a lot of people will just look at those and ignore all the rest of it, all the rest of what's been said, all the rest of it. Okay. The leaders of the church are honest but imperfect men. Remember the words of Moroni, condemn me not because of mine imperfection, neither my Father, but rather give thanks unto God that he hath made manifest unto you our imperfections, that ye may learn to be more wise than we have been. And again, there are some of you that are going to apply that to the current prophet and apostle, saying, well, they're the ones that, are imperfect and they're making mistakes. They're good, they're called of God, but they're making mistakes. And going back in time, that's where the better information is. And that is not true, and that's wrong. It's not true, and it's wrong. I came across, let's see. What was I going to do next? Oh, this just goes through, this is on Fair Latter-day Saints. They point out this talk because they deal with a lot of the same things. They answer a lot of gospel questions and things about the church, and they come across the same thing too, where someone will find one idea somewhere and just run with it. So they point out some scriptures, D&C 26. All things shall be done by common consent in the church. By much faith and prayer for all things you shall receive by faith. Amen. And then this one, D&C 107, 27. And every decision made by either of these quorums must be by the unanimous vote of the same. That is, every member in each quorum must be agreed to its decisions in order to make their decisions of the same power or validity one with another. So you might be saying, well, this isn't talking about revelation, but it is the same principle. It is. Watch this video right here. It's called Inside Church Headquarters, the Power of Councils. So they don't just have their own idea and then preach it as truth. They don't, like, you're not going to see someone just like you're not going to see President Oaks receive some revelation and then roll that out to the church. They all talk about all these things. Whenever some like big thing is being revealed to the church, it's by unanimous vote, or however you want to say it. This is called the power of councils. You should watch this so you can understand how this church operates. It's not, you don't just have rogue people. It's all done together in oneness. Okay? That's the way that the church works. There was this that I wanted to read. This is the 14 fundamentals of following the prophet. And this should be required reading for everybody, I think, because there's so many people that struggle with this. Not so many, but there's people that struggle with this. So look at this. This is fundamental number 14. And this was put out by Ezra Taft Benson, and he did it. This ended up going in the Ensign, and it was a message from the first presidency. Okay. You have this right here. Oh, no, that's not it. Did I close out of it? Okay. I don't know. I don't know where it is. But anyway, so Ezra Taft Benson. Okay. So let's go to number 3. The living prophet is more important to us than a dead prophet. The living prophet has the power of TNT. By that, I mean today's news today. TNT, today's news today. God's revelations to Adam did not instruct Noah how to build the ark. Noah needed his own revelation. Therefore, the most important prophet, so far as you and I are concerned, is the one living prophet in our day and age to whom the Lord is currently revealing his will for us. Stop. He's not saying that what the previous prophets said are wrong or should be discarded or you shouldn't listen to it. There's people that think in black and white terms and they don't understand this concept that you take it all together and that it's a work in progress, that the longer you go through time and the more revelation is received, the more complete the picture gets. And that includes with the second coming. Okay, so it's not, oh, you have to pick between living prophets and dead prophets. That's not it at all. It's a progression, and it builds on the previous prophets. So anyway, Ezra Taft Benson continues. Therefore, the most important reading we can do is any of the words the prophet contained. Wait, what? The most important reading we can do is any of the words of the prophet contained each week in the church section of the Deseret News, and any words of the prophet contained each month in our church magazines. And that would include the apostles too. They are part of this. They're not the prophet, but you listen to what they say, you listen to the general authorities, and this is what was just put out by David A. Bednar just yesterday about the gathering and how it's not all to Jackson County, Missouri. But it continues. Let's see. I'm so grateful that the current conference report is studied as part of one of your religion classes. The course titled "Teachings of the Living Prophets," number 333. May I commend that class? May I commend that class to you and suggest that you get a copy of the class manual. Okay. Beware of those who would pit the dead prophets against the living prophets, for the living prophets always take precedence. And I would say that Joseph Smith is included, but it's not a battle. Some of you want to see this as like a battle. And knowing no one is saying that this is a battle. This is not living versus dead prophets. But some people get stuck in the past and they don't want to see the further revelation that's been received because they already have some idea constructed in their head. And so when new revelation is received, it distorts that idea or it takes away the foundation of it or whatever. And no one wants to have to go through that hassle. I understand. But you can't just stagnate. You can't stay in the 1830s. You can't stay in the 1840s, 50s, 60s. You have to keep going with what the Lord is telling his church to do. And it's been revealed that your gathering place is not to Jackson County, Missouri. It's to wherever you live. If you live in Russia, that's for you. You gather to your stake and you go to your temple, the temple district that you pertain to. There may be individuals that are asked to come help at the actual New Jerusalem, the center place. That definitely could happen. I think the Lord is working with some people to bring them to the Missouri area. We have a lot of members. Just a minute, honey. My. Well, let's go to Walmart. Sorry, she's waiting for me to finish this video. LDS meeting house locator. Let's take a look at Missouri. I like using this as a way to kind of just get a rough feel for where members of the church are and how many. But you can see that the Kansas City area. Now these are meeting houses. So some of these are stake buildings. Some of them are just they're ward buildings. Okay, but the Kansas City area, there's already a lot of people there, and I've heard from many of you that you've felt that you should move to this area. Okay, and that's great because maybe you're being called back, and that doesn't mean that no one else is special. I'm not living in the Kansas City area, but I did feel the call to move to Kansas, and I live in this area, which is somewhat close. But I don't think it says anything about you if you live in Salt Lake City or Kansas City or directly in Independence, Missouri. For the Lord, he moves the pieces across the board. And for whatever reason, some of you are there, but I don't have any plans of leaving where I am. I have no desire to move to over here because I like it better in this western part. Well, I'm not in western Kansas. I'm in what you would call south central Kansas. But it's a lot more flat over here. And as you start to go even just a little bit this way, like by Independence, Kansas, Coffeyville, places like that, it starts to get more hilly. And I don't like it. I don't like it. Now, if the Lord inspires me to move up here, we'll do it. But as far as my plans are concerned, I don't plan on doing it unless I feel the Spirit say that. So, but you are called, unless the Spirit directs otherwise, or unless you get like some specific call from like a general authority, you are called to Toronto, if that's where you're from, Michigan, if that's where you're from, Nova Scotia, Madrid, Barcelona, if that's where you're from, Palma de Mallorca. I served here, by the way. I served both in Palma, and then me and my companion opened up Inca, and I'm happy to see that there is now, it looks like it's a branch, the Inca branch. That's cool. That started with me. I didn't have any baptisms while I was here, but me and this other guy, we were the first ones here in Inca. Anyway, the point is, the world is where you're called to be, wherever you live, and there might be special circumstances that bring you to the church headquarters, and it's as simple as that. And that's the messaging. And that's what the message has been by multiple general authorities. I'm collecting them all. And there's probably more that have said more about this. Over time, I'm going to have all the quotes right here. Okay. And that's what makes something more valid, is when it's repeated by the 15 and other general authorities. And the more recent it is, the more correct it is, the more up to date. I don't know of any computers where you look for the most recent, not update, but there's no such thing as a down date. Usually, the way that computers work, you want to keep them up to date, have the security up to date on your computer, have the latest whatever fixes. And I know that there's like retro, computers out there. People want to have like the older computers so they can run like older games and stuff like that, like retro games. But generally speaking, if you're like if you're like a company, an organization, you need to have the most updated software or keep things up to date. Um, and that's how the Lord's church works. That's what makes us unique and different from other churches, is that there's continual revelation. It's going to continue to change, and things are going to change in the millennium. It's progression, and it's not about, oh, older prophets are better than newer prophets. Newer prophets are better than older prophets. It's not like that. It's just, okay, we learn from the old prophets and we progress. And we keep adding to our knowledge. And we keep adding, and we keep adding, and we keep adding. And that's it. Hopefully that's clear. Again, I anticipate there's going to be people that anytime I bring up things like this, someone always gets upset. And that's fine. It's not my intention. Well, it's not fine. It's not my intention to upset you. Hopefully you can just, if you disagree, just disagree with grace, and that's fine. Okay, let's just be friends. We don't have to get into a fight over things like this. I'm sure that we have a lot more in common than what we don't. A lot more in common than what we don't. So let's focus on that. But hopefully, you'll take this new information, if it is new to you. Hopefully, you'll take it into account. Based on everything that we just read and studied together. Please do not be offended. Please don't think that I'm being condescending. I'm not trying to be. It's a topic that keeps coming up, and I keep trying to nail it down. But I'm not trying to be condescending or rude or whatever. I respect you. I respect your views. Please don't leave any rude comments. Just agree to disagree, and that's fine. Let's not have contention. Okay, well, that's going to be it for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.